The woman's hands trembled as she clutched the transcript. Her eyes darted across the page, reading the same lines over and over. 3 deaths, 3 complete lives, and she remembered none of them. The year was 1923, in a modest office in Virginia Beach. The afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows, illuminating motes that danced like souls between worlds. Margaret Harrison had come seeking answers about her chronic nightmares, her inexplicable fears, her sense of not belonging anywhere. What she found instead was a map of her own eternity. Edgar Cayce lay on the worn leather couch beside her, his, breathing deep and rhythmic, still in the trance that had revealed her soul's journey. His secretary, Gladys Davis, continued transcribing his words, each syllable carrying weight that seemed to press against the very walls of the room. The young woman's shorthand flew across the page, capturing revelations that would shake the foundations of how humanity understood existence itself. "The soul before you," Cayce's voice continued, not quite his own, deeper, more resonant, as if speaking from across vast distances of time, "has walked this earth in 3 complete cycles. First, as a healer in ancient Egypt, in the temple of Isis, where death came through sacrifice, she gave her life to save a royal child from poison, knowing the cost, embracing it as service." Margaret gasped. The recurring dream of snakes, of a child's cry, of choosing to take the venom into her own veins. Suddenly it wasn't just a nightmare. It was a memory. "Second," the voice continued through Cayce's still form, "as a merchant in medieval France, in the port city of Marseille, where plague took the body but not the spirit, this soul stayed when others fled, distributing his wealth among the dying, holding the hands of the abandoned until the Black Death claimed him too. He died not from disease but from exhaustion, from giving too much, from a heart that broke for humanity's suffering." The room seemed to shift. Margaret could almost smell it, the herbs burning to ward off pestilence, the sea salt mixed with decay, the strange peace that came with accepting death as a friend rather than an enemy. Third, as a child in colonial America, a daughter of Salem, where fever ended the journey before it truly began. 7 years old, with gifts that frightened even her mother, she saw the unseen, spoke with the departed, knew things a child shouldn't know. The fever was almost a mercy. It took her before the trials began, before fear could turn to persecution. Margaret's breath caught. Her daughter Emma, now 7 years old, had the same gifts, the same unsettling ability to know things, to see things, the same fever dreams that terrified and enlightened in equal measure. "You haven't lived once," Cayce's entranced voice continued, each word seeming to etch itself into the air. "You have died 3 times, and in each death you learned." The Egyptian priestess learned that sacrifice transforms into power. The French merchant learned that generosity transcends flesh. The Salem child learned that innocence preserves wisdom. Each death was a doorway, each life a classroom. And, now in this 4th incarnation, you carry all these lessons within you. The woman, Margaret, felt something stir deep within her consciousness. Not memory exactly, but recognition. A knowing that bypassed the mind and spoke directly to something older, something that had always been there, waiting. It was like hearing her true name spoken aloud after a lifetime of amnesia. This was 1923, and what Edgar Cayce was revealing would change everything. He wasn't speaking of imagination or metaphor. He was mapping the actual journey of souls through time, through bodies, through deaths that were not endings, but transitions. His gift had emerged accidentally, a childhood injury that opened doors between worlds, but its purpose was becoming clear. He was meant to remind humanity of what it had forgotten, that death was not the enemy but the teacher, the sleeping prophet they called him. But in this moment he was more than that. He was a bridge between worlds, a translator of the eternal record where every life, every death, every breath was inscribed in light. The Akashic records, he would later call them. the cosmic library, where all souls' journeys were written not in ink, but in essence. Death is not what you think, the voice speaking through Cayce continued. It is not cessation, but transformation, not ending, but graduation. The soul you are has worn many costumes, played many roles, died many deaths. But the actor remains unchanged, eternal, learning through each performance. Margaret's rational mind, the part educated at Radcliffe, the part that read scientific journals and scoffed at spiritualism, wanted to reject it, to laugh, to leave. But something deeper held her there. Because somewhere, in a place beyond thought, she knew he was right. She had been here before, not in this room, but on this earth. Not in this body, but in this eternal dance of departure and return. Tell me, she whispered, her voice barely audible, why don't I remember? The entranced Cayce seemed to smile, though his eyes remained closed. Because remembering everything would be like trying to attend 4 schools simultaneously. The soul veils its past to fully engage with the present. But the veils thin at certain moments, in dreams, in meditation, in the presence of souls we've known before. And sometimes, his voice grew even deeper, when we sit with those who can read my eternal record. What Cayce revealed that day would echo through decades. He showed that death was not a wall but a door, not an ending but a comma in an eternal sentence. And most remarkably, he demonstrated that these past deaths left traces, patterns, lessons that shaped who we are today. Your unexplained fears, your instant connections with strangers, your recurring dreams, all were whispers from lives lived and deaths experienced. But there was more. Such more. The 3 deaths you've experienced, Cayce continued, are preparing you for a 4th kind of death, one that doesn't require leaving the body. This is the death of illusion, the death of the false self, the death that leads to awakening while still in flesh. This is why you're here. Not to learn about your past, but to die to limitation and be reborn to truth. Margaret felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't say why. They weren't tears of sadness, but of recognition, of coming home, to a truth so vast it could only be approached through poetry, through paradox, through the impossible made real. You see, according to Cayce, you reading this now, you have also died before, multiple times. And whether you remember or not, those deaths shaped you. They brought you to this moment, to these words, to this recognition that something in his message rings true in a way that transcends belief. The question isn't whether you've lived before. The question is what your previous deaths are trying to teach you in this life, because every soul carries what Cayce called the death wisdom, lessons that can only be learned by passing through that ultimate transition. And sometimes, just sometimes, a crack appears in the veil and we remember not the details, but the essence. We remember that we are immortal beings playing at mortality, eternal souls pretending to be temporary, deathless consciousness, experiencing the profound teaching that only death can provide. As Margaret left Cayce's office that day, she carried, with her more than just a transcript. She carried the beginning of an awakening that would transform not just her understanding of death, but her entire approach to life. Because once you know, truly know, that you've died before and will die, again something fundamental shifts. Death loses its terror and becomes what it always was, a doorway, a teacher, a friend who walks beside us, reminding us that every moment is both an ending and a beginning. And Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet who could read the Book of Souls, had given her, and through her all of us, the key to understanding humanity's greatest mystery. We don't die, we transform, we don't end, we graduate, we don't cease. We continue, carrying the wisdom of our deaths like treasures into each new life, each new opportunity to remember who we really are. Edgar Cayce's gift emerged accidentally. A childhood accident had left him partially paralyzed, and in desperation, he entered a self-induced trance to diagnose his own condition. What happened next defied medical explanation. Not only did he accurately identify his ailment, but he prescribed a treatment that completely healed him. But healing bodies was just the beginning. As Cayce's trances deepened, he began accessing something he called the Akashic Records, a cosmic library where every soul's journey through eternity was written. Here, death was not a period, but a transition between chapters. The soul cannot die, Cayce explained after one particularly profound session. It can only transform. What you call death is merely the soul taking off a worn garment and preparing for a new one. He described the process with startling precision. At the moment of death, the soul doesn't immediately leave. It hovers, often for hours or even days, watching, understanding, releasing. This is why, he claimed, so many people report sensing their departed loved ones nearby just after passing, because they truly are. Then comes the life review, but not as judgment from an external deity. Instead, the soul experiences every moment of its life from multiple perspectives simultaneously. You feel not only your own emotions, but those of everyone you affected. That harsh word spoken in anger. You experience the wound it caused. That moment of unexpected kindness. You feel the warmth it brought to another's heart. But here's where Cayce's revelations became revolutionary. This review includes not just the life just ended, but all previous lives. The soul sees patterns, connections, karma playing out across centuries. That inexplicable fear of water. Perhaps you drowned in a previous incarnation. That instant connection with a stranger. Maybe you were family 3 lifetimes ago. One caso particularly haunted those who heard it. A young boy brought to Cayce by desperate parents suffered from recurring nightmares of suffocation. In trance, Cayce revealed the child had been a soldier in the Civil War, dying in a collapsed trench. The description was so detailed, including the regiment number and battle location, that historical records later confirmed it. But Cayce went further. He explained that between lives, souls don't simply wait. They study, they plan, they choose. Yes, choose. According to Cayce, we select our next life based on what our soul needs to learn. We choose our parents, our circumstances, even our challenges. Before you were born, he once told a client, you saw this life like a map spread before you. You saw the difficulties you would face, the people you would meet, the lessons available. And you said yes because your soul knew what it needed. This wasn't spiritual bypassing or victim blaming. Cayce was careful to explain that choosing our circumstances doesn't mean we deserve suffering or that we shouldn't work to improve conditions. Rather, it means our souls are far braver and wiser than our conscious minds can fathom. The implications were staggering. If we've lived before, if we've died before, then death loses its sting. It becomes not an enemy to be feared, but a familiar transition, like walking from one room to another in a house we've always known. The most profound element of Cayce's revelations wasn't just that we had lived before. It was how those previous deaths shaped our current existence. He called them soul memories, imprints so deep they influenced everything from our personalities to our physical health. Consider the case of Thomas Andrews, a successful businessman who came to Cayce in 1931, complaining of an inexplicable fear that was ruining his life. Despite his wealth and achievements, he couldn't shake the feeling that everything would be suddenly taken from him. He hoarded money obsessively, trusted no one, and lived in constant anxiety. In trance, Cayce saw the root of this fear. In 1692, in what is now Salem, this soul faced accusation, not of witchcraft but of theft. False witnesses spoke against him. His property was seized, his family cast out. He died in prison, not from execution but from despair, believing the world had betrayed him. But Cayce saw deeper still. This wasn't Andrew's first experience with sudden loss. In ancient Rome, as a merchant, he had lost everything when Mount Vesuvius erupted. In medieval England, as a landowner, plague had taken his family and fortune in a matter of weeks. 3 times, Cayce intoned, this soul has experienced the pattern of building and losing. Now, in this life, He must learn that true security comes not from what can be taken, but from what can never be lost. The love we give, the wisdom we gain, the soul's eternal nature. The transformation in Andrews was remarkable. Understanding the source of his fear didn't eliminate it instantly, but it gave him context. He began to see his compulsions not as character flaws, but as soul memories seeking healing. Gradually, he learned to trust again, to give generously, to find security in spiritual rather than material wealth. This pattern repeated in countless readings. A woman terrified of childbirth discovered she had died in labor in 2 previous lives. A man unable to commit to relationships learned he had lost lovers to war and disease across multiple incarnations. Each revelation brought not just understanding, but the possibility of healing. Cayce explained that these soul memories served a purpose. They were not punishments but opportunities. Each life presented chances to face old fears, to balance karmic debts, to develop qualities the soul lacked. You might wonder, Cayce once said, emerging from a particularly deep trance, why would a soul choose to suffer? But you're thinking like a human, not like an eternal being. To the soul, a lifetime is like a single day of school. Difficult, yes, but temporary and purposeful. He gave the example of a soul that had been cruel and powerful in one life, choosing to return as someone powerless and vulnerable. Not as punishment, but to develop empathy, to understand suffering from the other side, to balance the scales of experience. The healing came through recognition. Once people understood that their deepest fears and strongest attractions often stemmed from past life experiences, they could begin to work with them rather than against them. A woman, irrationally, afraid of knives, discovered she had died by the sword. A man, inexplicably drawn to aviation, learned he had been a Wright brothers contemporary who died in an early flight attempt. But Cayce warned against becoming too fascinated with past lives. The purpose of knowing your previous deaths, he said, is not to escape into the past, but to free yourself for the present. Every life, including this one, is a fresh opportunity. What matters is not who you were, but who you choose to become. In 1935, Edgar Cayce revealed something that shook even his most devoted followers. During a reading for a terminally ill patient, he suddenly spoke of death not as a single event, but as a process that had already begun for everyone alive. "You think death comes at the end?" the entranced Cayce said, his voice carrying an otherworldly authority. "But death walks with you daily. Every cell in your body dies and is reborn. Every 7 years, you are literally not the same person. You have already died multiple times within this very lifetime." He went on to describe what he called the 3 deaths within each incarnation. The first death occurs in childhood, when the pure soul consciousness becomes veiled by ego and personality. The second death happens when we abandon our dreams and authentic self for societal expectations. The third death is what we call physical death, but by then, Cayce insisted, it's merely a formality. The real death, he said, is forgetting who you truly are. This revelation connected to his larger teaching about past lives. Just as we die and are reborn within a single lifetime, we die and are reborn across multiple lifetimes. The pattern repeats at every level: cellular, psychological, spiritual. During one remarkable session, Cayce described what happens in the moments after physical death with unprecedented detail. The soul, he said, experiences 7 distinct stages. First comes the separation, where consciousness detaches from the physical form. Many souls, he noted, try to re-enter their bodies at this stage, not yet accepting the transition. Second is the review, but not the life review many expect. This is a review of the moment of death itself. The soul examines, did I face death with fear or acceptance? Did I complete what I came to do? Did I leave love or bitterness behind? Third comes the awakening to the astral realm. Here, the soul realizes it still exists, still thinks, still feels, but without physical limitations. This can be disorienting or liberating, depending on the soul's preparation. Fourth is the meeting with what Cayce called the reception committee. Souls we've known who've passed before, guides who've watched over us, sometimes even aspects of our own higher self. Fifth is the expanded life review, where we see not just our recent life, but the connections between all our lives. Patterns emerge, karma becomes clear, the soul's journey reveals its logic. Sixth is the period of rest and reflection. Some souls, Cayce said, need lengthy restoration, especially after difficult lives. Others, eager to continue their journey, move quickly to the next stage. Seventh is the preparation for return. Here the soul works with guides to choose its next incarnation, selecting the circumstances that will best serve its continued growth. But Cayce's most startling revelation was this: we can experience these stages while still alive. Through meditation, through spiritual practice, through what he called dying daily, we can familiarize ourselves with these transitions. The Master Jesus said you must die to be reborn, Cayce noted. He wasn't speaking of physical death, but of this inner process. Every time you release an old pattern, forgive a deep hurt, surrender ego for love, you die a small death. And in that dying, you practice for the greater transition. He gave practical advice for this practice. Meditation, he said, is rehearsal for death. In deep meditation, consciousness separates from the body just as it does in death. The difference is, the silver cord, the energetic connection, remains intact. If you want to overcome the fear of death, Cayce advised, learn to meditate deeply. In that state, you'll discover what every soul knows after passing. You are not your body. You are not your thoughts. You are not even your memories. You are eternal consciousness, temporarily focused in flesh. In his final years, Edgar Cayce synthesized everything he had learned about death, rebirth, and the soul's journey into what he called the ultimate map. This wasn't a geographical guide, but a spiritual framework for understanding our eternal nature. Every soul, he explained in 1944, just months before his own passing, is on a journey from separation to unity. Death is not the opposite of life. It's the servant of life, the teacher that reminds us what we truly are. He drew connections that stunned even those familiar with his work. The 3 deaths we experience in each lifetime, he said, mirror the 3 great deaths in human history: the fall from paradise, forgetting our divine nature; the deluge, being overwhelmed by material existence; and the resurrection, remembering and returning to our source. But these aren't just historical events, they're patterns each soul experiences. We fall from innocence, we're flooded by life's challenges, and ultimately we rise again, whether in this life or the next. Cayce revealed that between lives, souls don't simply rest. They attend what he called universities of the spirit, learning in ways impossible while embodied. Some souls specialize in healing and return as doctors or therapists. Others study cosmic law and incarnate as teachers or judges. Still others focus on creativity and come back as artists or innovators. Your interests in this life, he said, often reflect your studies between lives. That child prodigy at the piano, they've been preparing for centuries. That natural teacher who makes complex things simple, they've been training in celestial academies. But the ultimate purpose, Cayce insisted, wasn't to escape the cycle of death and rebirth. It was to master it, to become conscious participants rather than unconscious victims. He told the story of a soul he encountered in the records, a being that had achieved what he called conscious continuity. This soul could die and be reborn, without forgetting, carrying full awareness from one life to the next. Such beings, Cayce said, were humanity's future. Imagine, he said, living with the wisdom of all your lives available to you. Imagine facing death not with fear, but with the calm knowledge of someone stepping from one room to another in their own home. This is possible. This is your destiny. As Cayce's own death approached, he demonstrated this teaching, despite physical pain and exhaustion from decades of readings. He remained serene. "I'm not leaving," he told his wife Gertrude. "I'm just changing my address." His final reading, given for himself, was profound in its simplicity. The soul that has learned to die daily dies but once. The soul that fears death dies 1,000 times. Choose wisely. On January 3rd, 1945, Edgar Cayce passed from this world. Those present reported that in his final moments, his face transformed. The pain disappeared, replaced by what witnesses described as recognition and joy. His last words were, "I see them. They're all here. How beautiful." But his teachings about death and rebirth didn't end with his passing. If his revelations were correct, he's already among us again, perhaps reading these very words, remembering who he was, who he is, who we all are, because that's the ultimate secret Cayce revealed. We don't have past lives. We have one continuous life, punctuated by what we call deaths, but which are really just breath pauses in an eternal song. Every death is a comma, not a period. Every birth is a new verse, not a new poem. You've already died 3 times, probably more, and you'll die again. But now you know what Cayce knew, what the ancient mysteries taught, what your soul has always whispered. Death is not the end. It's not even an interruption. It's the sacred pause between movements in the symphony of your eternal existence, and perhaps, just perhaps, in reading these words, some part of you remembers dying, remembers returning, remembers that you are far more than this single life, this single body, this single story. You are the eternal witness, the deathless one, playing the cosmic game of forgetting and remembering, losing and finding, dying and being reborn. And in that knowing, death loses its power over you because you've already survived it. 3 times and counting.